Hi, good afternoon, everyone. April 19th, 2022. In the last episode, we saw how cloud technology works with an analogy for a drinking water well, which is a shared resource, if you will. When you go to any city now, water comes to you from a common pool and gets distributed via pipes to your homes. And then the subscriber, like you and me, end up paying the water bill to your town or city every month based on the amount of water we use. So that's essentially cloud is. So in this episode, we'll look at the top cloud ETFs. The top five, in my opinion, are CLOU, QQQ, VGT, SKY, WCLD. All these are offered by different asset management companies, and we will look at them in depth. The first thing I wanted to look at was the top 10 holdings of these five ETFs. If you essentially look at it, predominantly the top 10 holdings is for each of them is pretty high. So if you look at something like WCLD, the top 10 holdings is 15%, while you have something like VGT, which is Vanguard's technology fund, 60% in this top 10 companies. And then you have Sky, which has got 37%. And then QQQ, which follows the NASDAQ, 52%, and then CLOU, CLOU has got 46%. And if you look at the commonality of these funds, if you see QQQ and VGT looks very similar. You have Apple, Microsoft, Amazon is not here, but Tesla is not here. Nvidia is there. And then you have Alphabet here, and then we have Meta here. We don't have Meta on this. Then we have Broadcom here, and then we have Broadcom here, and then Costco is here. Costco is not here on the VGT, so it's kind of interesting. These two funds predominantly, if you look at it in a broader way, targets the large cap, if you will. And if you look at something like CLOU, they're targeting slightly more mature cloud companies, like Dropbox, Akamai, Five9, Digital Realty, Workday. These have been there. These companies have been there for a while now. They got IPO'd a while ago, and so I would rate these companies in the mid market segment. And then if you look at something like WCLD, it's kind of interesting. You might have heard about all these companies: Agora, Block, which was Square, Sprout Social, Squarespace, CrowdStrike, which is in cybersecurity, Cloudflare, which is a cloud company, Wix, through which you can do host your websites, so on and so forth. These are slightly more relevant in the recent space. The last 2 years, especially some of these stocks took a rapid rise, and of course they have fallen since then this year. And then we look at Sky. It has got a mix of large cap like Alphabet, which is Google, Microsoft, Amazon, and Alibaba, and then Oracle, which has been there for ages, and then Citrix Systems. So it's kind of a mixed bag here with Sky, large cap, mid cap, and few of the ones which would be in the growth space. I would say more probably pure storage and Arista. So there's not much correlation, and we'll look at it in the next slide. So if you look at overlap and holdings of these, so the way to understand this particular slide is if you look at cloud, correlation is of course 100%, but if you look at the stocks held in the cloud ETF with QQQ, it's 9% overlap. And with Sky, it's 24%, VGT is 7%. It has much more correlation with Wisdom Cloud, 24%. Right? So the idea behind this is if you're investing in all these five funds, you want to invest in as diverse as possible, right? Because you want to have less correlation between these funds. So if I were you, I would pick something like VGT because it's got low expense, it has low correlation with say CLOU and WCLD. So I'll pick VGT, and then probably I'll pick Cloud and WCLD to do my portfolio. And if you see the performance correlation, it's kind of interesting. If you look at cloud versus QQQ, there's a 84% correlation here, right? And if you look at something like VGT, same thing, 84%. The reason for that is this is more like market index, the NASDAQ QQQ, and VGT is also on the tech side, predominantly holding all the large cap tech companies. So as they move up or down, especially this CLOU, SKY, and WCLD will have high correlation with VGT and QQQ. That's my take on that. Let's look at the yield. If you look at the yield, it's not much here. So this is much lower than the inflation. Now here everybody's talking about inflation now. So not a whole lot from a yield perspective. Even the shareholder yield is pretty low. So not much to talk about here. Especially with these kind of funds, what you're looking is for capital gains, not for dividends. From a valuation perspective, if you look at it, if you see VGT and QQQ is in line with the S&P 500, S&P is around 19 in terms of PE ratios, and this one is 28 and this one is 32 because of the growth that is attached to tech companies or cloud companies, right? And then if you look at the price to cash flow, which is very high, these kind of, if you look at WCLD, this fund has got stocks that is churning out much more cash flow in terms of price, so which is fantastic. So this could be a good fund because cloud companies are predominantly on an OPEX basis. What I mean by that is operational expense for an IT department within a company. So companies keep spending on cloud technologies. So and the stocks held in WCLD's portfolio seems to churn out much more cash flow than the other four funds. That's key. And if you looked at the price to sales also, it's the price is 9 times, close to 9 times the sales that's happening with this portfolio with this particular fund, WCLD. Quality, right? In terms of return on assets, many of these companies have data centers that they themselves host, which is a capital expense, or they host it on AWS, which is Amazon Web Services, GCP, which is Google Cloud Platform, or Microsoft Azure, which is Microsoft's cloud platform. If you look at ROE, which is what I would look here, you see QQQ is generating 27% and VGT is generating close to 28%. The reason for that is we have stocks like Alphabet, Amazon, Alibaba, and Nvidia and Costco, especially in QQQ, which is what is generating these returns because of the market cap and the growth that they had. All right. In terms of leverage, most of these companies are leveraged in the past few years. A lot of the companies have issued a lot of shares. They have also borrowed a lot because the borrowing rates were cheap. So the stocks held in this portfolio are around this leverage, which is kind of high. If you look at the operating margins, both for QQQ and VGT is in the double digits, which is very good. If you want to take a bet on long-term consistent growth, I would go with QQQ or VGT. If you're looking more for innovation, I'll go with WCLD, SKY, or CLOU. In terms of growth, if you look at the estimated long-term growth, pretty decent across all the funds. Again, WCLD is beating all the other funds because they have high growth cloud companies. That's the reason the estimated long-term growth is much higher for them. If you look at the sales growth across these funds, so the companies that are held within these funds are growing at this pace. So if you look at WCLD, it's growing at 30% on a year-to-year basis, 27, 28%, and 28% on a 3-year and 5-year basis, which is amazing if you look at it, right? So most of these funds are double-digit growth, except QQQ and VGT. The reason for this is they have large caps, like I mentioned before, Amazon, Alphabet, Nvidia. These are all big companies. For them to grow at such a high pace is very, very hard. They will be consistently growing, but not at the pace with which we have these innovator kind of companies in this kind of ETF like WCLD or CLOU. If you look at the price momentum, very good momentum across the board for all these funds. The reason for that is, of course, tech has been tech and cloud is very loud. So that's why there's a lot of momentum attached to these cloud stocks and, of course, these cloud ETFs. If you look at the sector exposure, right? So if you look at the sector exposure among cloud, QQQ, Sky, VGT, and WCLD, those are the colors here attached to these funds. Predominantly in IT, right? So that's what we want. We don't want them in consumer discretionary, like we saw Costco is being held by one of the funds. Consumer staples, healthcare. We don't real estate. We don't want cloud funds to be holding these kind of stocks. Communication services can overlap. Something like Twilio, which is a market leader in unified communication management. Can be held in communication services. That is understandable, but not in consumer discretionary consumer staples or real estate, right? If you look at the region exposure, predominantly, I would say this is all in US. I would say that's why this major exposure is in US across all these funds. Country exposure, again, if you look at it, United States dominates close to like 90% and above for across all the funds. Some exposure towards China because of Alibaba, Tencent, Baidu, NetEase, those kind of stocks maybe, but predominantly United States exposure, which is good because dollar is the reserve currency, and we have this cloud infrastructure here, so there's no currency exposure for us from a currency perspective. From a market cap perspective, if you look at it, cloud has got 35 number of stocks, QQQ 101, Sky has got 67, VGT has got 360, WCLD has got 76. What this means is less the number of stocks, more concentrated, the risk is higher, but the potential for higher growth is also there because one can manage this portfolio of 35 companies. The interesting thing is there's a person called Tobias Carlyle who mentions that beyond 20 to 30 companies, the correlation or diversification risk, there's no diversification risk beyond 20 or 30 stocks. So, but predominantly all these ETFs have many stocks because they're trying to take a small position and see which one works and eliminate the other positions as they grow forward. In terms of market cap, you can see that VGT, the Vanguard fund, and the QQQ, the Nasdaq index fund, both have massive assets that they are holding. Right, the smallest one is WCLD, so they are much more nimble. And if you look at from an average cap perspective, market cap perspective, there is much more valuation given to growth cloud stocks. That's why if you compare something like this one, it has got 1598 billion in market cap, and the average market cap is 21 billion. While for something like this, it's much lower because it's got larger cap companies in this. In terms of and then it shows the percentage weight of the ETF with market cap with greater than 10 billion, between 2 and 10 billion, and less than 2 billion, right? So, and this one has got a good exposure towards less than 2 billion market cap. But this is where the growth comes from. Smaller the companies, much nimble they are, but they come with risk as well. And similar from a market cap exposure perspective, predominantly all these funds have large cap exposure. QQQ and VGT a predominant exposure towards large cap, as we know, and as we go to the other funds, CLOU, Sky, and WCLD, much more exposure towards mid cap, and WCLD, as we see, has much more exposure towards small cap, and the growth essentially comes from small cap and large cap. And if you look at the performance, it's kind of interesting. They predominantly go in a similar way fashion. But if you see a WCLD, it went through the roof and then it came down like all the other funds, and they've all bounced back quite a bit. Just looked at it for last 3 years just to see what's the correlation visually, and they go up and down in a very similar fashion. So CLOU, Sky, and WCLD predominantly should be following VGT or QQQ because both QQQ and VGT are kind of index funds with large holdings, and the other funds